That drone is HOA property, Mr. Caldwell, she said, her voice a grating mix of feigned sweetness and bureaucratic steel. It's for compliance checks. If you have an issue with its flight path, you can submit a formal complaint to the Architectural Review Committee, which I chair. Her name was Carol, and she was the self-appointed empress of our quiet suburban cul-de-sac. She stood on my driveway, arms crossed over a garish floral print blouse, her face a mask of smug authority. She was one of those people who mistakes a petty title for genuine power, a tin-pot dictator ruling over a kingdom of manicured lawns and beige vinyl siding. I simply looked at her from my open garage door, letting the silence stretch. I didn't get angry. I don't do that anymore. Anger is a tactical error, an expenditure of energy that clouds judgment. In my old life, clouded judgment got people killed. Here, it just gave people like Carol an advantage. The drone will not fly over my property again, I stated. It wasn't a request. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the flat finality of a weather report predicting a hurricane. She gave a short, barking laugh. Oh, I don't think you're in a position to make demands. Article 7, Section 4 of the Covenants clearly grants the board easement for the purposes of inspection. That drone saves us the trouble of intrusive walkarounds. You should be grateful. I held her gaze. Her eyes were small and hard, glittering with the thrill of confrontation. She lived for this. This was her battlefield. The problem for her was that I had spent 22 years on actual battlefields, both kinetic and digital. She was armed with a 3-ring binder and a sense of entitlement. I was armed with a skill set she couldn't possibly comprehend. She had no idea who she was dealing with. Carol, I said, my voice dropping just enough to make it feel heavy. My property line extends vertically. Your device constitutes an unauthorized intrusion into my private airspace. This is your only warning. Do not fly it over my property again. Her face began its slow journey toward crimson. It was a fascinating physiological response I would come to document with detached precision. Is that a threat, Mr. Caldwell? It's a tactical advisory, I replied, and turned to go back into my garage. Have a nice day. She sputtered behind me, a string of incoherent threats about fines and liens and special assessments. I ignored them. The initial contact was complete. The enemy had declared her intentions and revealed her primary weapon system. Now, it was a waiting game. She was predictable. Her arrogance was a vulnerability, a gaping hole in her defenses. She would escalate, and when she did, the trap would be sprung. She thought this was a neighborhood dispute. She was about to learn it was a counterinsurgency, and she was the insurgency. If you've ever had to deal with a petty tyrant who gets high on the smell of their own insignificant power, hit that subscribe button. You are absolutely going to want to see how this campaign ends. This wasn't just about a drone. It was about dismantling an empire built on nuisance fines and the quiet suffering of good people who just wanted to be left alone. The next afternoon, I was in my workshop. It's my sanctuary, the one place in this world I have configured to my exact specifications. It's soundproofed, climate-controlled, and shielded against electronic emissions. To the neighbors, it's where I build custom furniture. That's not entirely untrue, but the precision woodworking tools share space with signal analyzers, spectrum monitors, and racks of servers that hum with a quiet purpose. After 2 decades in Army signal intelligence, specializing in electronic warfare, old habits die hard. My retirement project was a highly sensitive, long-range passive radio telescope array. Interfering signals weren't just an annoyance, they were a critical contamination of my data. That's when I heard it. A high-pitched insectile whine. I checked the monitor connected to the perimeter system. There it was, a commercially available quadcopter, hovering at about 50 feet, just inside my back property line. Its camera gimbal was swiveling, pointing directly at my workshop. Carol, true to form, had escalated. She was conducting surveillance. This was her fatal mistake. My property is my fortress. Not in a paranoid way, but in a practical one. The perimeter is marked by a discrete, buried, low-voltage wire. It's connected to a system I designed, colloquially known in my old unit as a digital scarecrow. It's entirely legal. It emits a series of targeted, multi-frequency radio pulses designed to disrupt the guidance systems of pests. Deer with GPS collars, feral hogs with tracking tags, and, as it turns out, consumer-grade drones. It's programmed to activate only when a device crosses the perimeter and loiters within a specific geofenced area around my workshop, broadcasting on unauthorized frequencies. On my screen, I watch the system's logic gates fire. Threat identified. Unmanned aerial vehicle. Location: Sector Gamma, within prohibited zone. Flight pattern: stationary surveillance. Protocol initiated: active countermeasures. There was no explosion, no sound. Just a brief, invisible pulse of focused energy. On the drone's video feed, which I was, of course, passively intercepting, the screen dissolved into a rainbow of static. The high-pitched whine from outside abruptly ceased. A moment later, I heard a soft thud, as 4 pounds of plastic and cheap electronics met the thick St. Augustine grass of my lawn. The Queen had sent her scout, and my fortress had, quite literally, dropped it out of the sky. I walked outside, sipping a cup of coffee. The drone lay inert, a dead plastic beetle in the grass. I photographed it from multiple angles, documenting its position relative to my workshop and property lines. I used a surveyor's wheel to measure the exact distance, 18 feet inside my property line. I placed a time-stamped newspaper in one of the photos for good measure. Then, wearing nitrile gloves, I placed the drone in a Faraday bag to preserve its internal electronics from any further accidental signals and to maintain a chain of custody. The first phase of the operation, repel borders, was complete. Now, the second phase began. The documentation offensive. Carol didn't call. She didn't knock. An hour later, my email pinged. The subject line in all caps read, "Official notice of violation and fine." The email was a masterpiece of amateur legalese and impotent rage. It cited a half-dozen irrelevant bylaws, accused me of willful destruction of HOA property, and levied a fine of $5,000 for the drone, plus an additional $500 for creating a technological nuisance. It demanded immediate payment and the surrender of any and all weaponry used in the attack. I saved the email as a PDF. It was evidence item number 001. My home office is not like most. It's where I transitioned from military to civilian life, but the disciplines remained. One wall is covered in corkboard. The opposite wall holds my library, heavy on legal texts, engineering manuals, and histories of asymmetrical warfare. My desk is a clean, wide surface with 3 monitors. I sat down, pulled up a fresh spreadsheet, and created a new file, Operation Overlord. A bit dramatic, perhaps, but it amused me. The columns were labeled date, time, event, witnesses, evidence item number, relevant statute or bylaw, and notes. The first entry was Carol's visit. The second was the drone incursion. The third was her email. This is how you win wars like this. Not with shouting or anger, but with overwhelming, meticulously organized information. You build a fortress of facts, a bastion of evidence so impregnable that the enemy exhaust themselves attacking it, revealing their own weaknesses in the process. Carol thought the fight was about a drone. I was already preparing a campaign that would dismantle her entire power structure. I spent the next 4 hours engaged in what the military calls pattern of life analysis. I used publicly available records, county property records, state business filings, social media, to build a complete intelligence picture of my antagonist. Carol wasn't just the HOA president. She was the sole proprietor of Prestige Property Management, the company the HOA paid a handsome monthly fee to manage our neighborhood. A clear conflict of interest and likely a violation of the HOA's own bylaws, not to mention state corporate law. Her brother-in-law owned Evergreen Perfection, the landscaping company that had an exclusive, no-bid contract with the HOA. The prices they charged were nearly double the market rate. The drone wasn't for compliance checks. It was for intimidation and data collection. It was a tool of control. By midnight, I had a complete dossier. I had downloaded and OCR'd every HOA newsletter, budget report, and meeting minute from the past 5 years. I cross-referenced payments to her companies with special assessments levied on residents. A clear pattern emerged. A community improvement fee would be announced, and a few weeks later, An equivalent amount would be paid out to one of her shell companies for consulting or project management. She wasn't just a petty tyrant. She was a grifter. This changed the entire strategic calculus. The objective was no longer just to repel her. The new objective was total neutralization. I drafted my official response to her email. It was polite, professional, and utterly devoid of emotion. "Dear Ms. President," it began, "I am in receipt of your email dated today. Please be advised that any and all future correspondence regarding this matter must be sent via certified mail to preserve a legal record. Pursuant to Federal Aviation Administration regulations, particularly 14 CFR, Part 107, the operation of an unmanned aircraft system, UAS, over private property without consent may constitute a trespass. Furthermore, the use of such a device for surveillance can be a violation of state privacy laws, including," I cited the specific state statute number. "The object you refer to ceased functioning and landed on my property after crossing into a restricted airspace I maintain for the purposes of protecting sensitive electronic equipment from radio frequency interference. Your demand for payment is rejected. Your accusation of destruction of property is noted and will be addressed in due course, should you choose to escalate this matter through formal legal channels. As for the device itself, it has been secured as evidence. You may arrange for its retrieval by a certified and bonded third-party electronics technician, at your expense, by providing 48 hours written notice. Said technician must be prepared to sign a chain of custody document upon receipt." I hit send. Then I printed a copy, attached it to a certified letter, and drove to the post office. The green slip from the certified mail became evidence item number 004. The war of paper had begun. She thought she was the master of bureaucracy. She was about to get a PhD-level education in it. The next morning, I began my neighborhood reconnaissance. This phase of the operation was about building a coalition. Insurgencies are rarely won alone. I needed to identify other victims, gather their stories, and forge them into a unified front. I started with Mr. Henderson, a widower in his late 70s who spent most of his days tending to his magnificent rose garden. I found him carefully pruning a beautiful Mr. Lincoln hybrid. "Morning, George," I said, leaning on the fence that separated our properties. He looked up, his face etched with a familiar weariness. "David, heard you had a bit of a run-in with our queen yesterday." News travels fast in a suburban monarchy. You could say that. She seems to have a fondness for aerial photography. George sighed, snipping a dead bloom with surgical precision. "Tell me about it. Last month it was my roses. Got a violation notice. Non-native plantings not in harmony with the community aesthetic. Said I had to replace them with boxwoods." "Boxwoods? Can you imagine?" He shook his head. "Been growing roses in this spot for 30 years. My late wife Eleanor, she planted the first one." This was the human cost of Carol's reign. It wasn't about rules. It was about power. It was the joy she derived from making a grieving old man choose between his wife's memory and a $500 fine. "Did you keep the notice, George?" I asked quietly. His eyes narrowed slightly. "Of course," and the nasty emails that followed. "Why?" "I'm compiling a record," I said. "A complete factual history of board overreach. If you're willing to share, I can promise you it will be put to good use." He studied me for a long moment. He saw not a vigilante, but a man with a plan. A flicker of something I hadn't seen in him for a long time, defiance, appeared in his eyes. "I'll print them out for you, David. Every last word." His story became Appendix A in my master file. The Henderson grievance. Next, I visited the Garcias, a young couple with 2 small children who had moved in about a year ago. I found Maria Garcia in her front yard, watching her kids on a brightly colored plastic swing set. It was a picture of suburban happiness, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, forcing a smile. "Please, call me David." I motioned toward the swing set. "Looks like fun." Her smile faltered. "For now. We got a letter last week. It's an unapproved permanent structure. We have to remove it or pay a fine of $50 a day." Her voice cracked. We can't afford that. But where are the kids supposed to play? This is why we moved out of the city, for a yard. Did the board approve the design before you installed it? I asked, knowing the answer. We submitted the plans. Carol said they were under review. We waited 2 months and never heard back, so we figured it was okay. The day after we put it up, the violation notice was taped to our door. A classic bureaucratic trap. Delay, then deny. It was designed to create maximum frustration and ensure compliance through exhaustion. Maria, I said gently, I'm putting together a file, a record of these kinds of incidents. I believe there's a pattern of selective enforcement and harassment. Would you and your husband be willing to provide a copy of your paperwork? The submission, the notice, any correspondence? She looked from me to her children, who were laughing as they soared back and forth on the swings. This was her motivation. This was what she was fighting for. Yes, she said, her voice firm. Anything that helps. Their story became Appendix B, the Garcia entrapment. Over the next week, I spoke to a dozen other families. The single mother fined because her recycling bin was visible from the street 2 hours before the approved time. The Army veteran ordered to take down his American flag because the pole was 2 inches too tall. The family who received a bill for lawn maintenance from Evergreen Perfection because their grass was allegedly a 1/4 inch over the regulation height. A bill that was automatically paid from their HOA dues without their consent. Each story was a thread. Alone, they were minor grievances, the petty tyrannies of suburban life. But woven together, they formed a tapestry of systematic abuse, financial malfeasance, and blatant corruption. I documented each one. I scanned their letters, their emails, their photos. I took sworn affidavits, notarized and dated. My fortress of facts was growing. It was no longer just about my airspace. It was about their homes. While I was gathering these ground-level truths, Carol's response to my certified letter arrived. It was, as expected, another escalation. This one was from a law firm. A 2-bit operation I discovered was run by her cousin. The letter was full of bluster and empty threats, demanding the same $5,500 and threatening a lawsuit and a property lien if I didn't comply within 10 days. It was a beautiful mistake. By involving a lawyer, she had officially elevated the conflict to a legal footing, opening the door for me to respond in kind. And by using her cousin, she added another layer to the nepotism and racketeering case I was building. This letter became evidence item number 008. My response was not to her or her cousin lawyer. My response was aimed much, much higher. I spent a weekend drafting a series of comprehensive, evidence-backed complaints. This was not about venting emotion. It was about presenting a cold, logical case to agencies that dealt in facts, not feelings. The first was a 22-page report to the State Attorney General's Office, Consumer Protection Division. It detailed the pattern of harassment, the conflicts of interest, the potential embezzlement of HOA funds, and the use of the HOA as a racketeering enterprise in violation of state RICO statutes. It included copies of Carol's business filings, the landscaping contracts, and a detailed financial analysis I had prepared comparing the HOA's budgets to its actual expenditures. I attached all 17 notarized affidavits from my neighbors as appendices. The second was a formal complaint to the IRS. I filled out Form 13,909, the tax-exempt organization complaint. I argued that the HOA, a 501c4 nonprofit, was engaged in substantial non-exempt activities. Specifically, it was operating for the private benefit of its president and her family, not for the social welfare of the community. I included the same financial analysis, highlighting how HOA dues were being funneled to for-profit companies owned by insiders. This threatened the HOA's tax-exempt status and opened Carol up to personal liability for back taxes and penalties. The third was to the Federal Aviation Administration. I filed a formal report against the HOA for reckless operation of a UAS, citing 14 CFR Part 107. I included my photographs, the surveyor's measurements, and a technical analysis of the drone's likely flight path and capabilities. I also noted that the drone was being operated for commercial purposes, property inspection for a paid management company, by an uncertified pilot, Another clear violation. The fourth, and perhaps most creative, was to the U.S. Postal Inspection Service. The lawyer's threatening letter, sent via U.S. mail in furtherance of what I alleged was a scheme to defraud, constituted mail fraud. It was a long shot, but federal agencies share information. Sometimes, all it takes is one hook. Each complaint package was nearly 100 pages long. I printed 4 copies. On Monday morning, I went to the post office and sent each one via registered mail, the most secure and legally significant method. The receipts became evidence items number 012 through number 015. The trap was set. The shells were in the air. Now, I just had to wait for them to land. Carol thought her next move was the annual HOA meeting, where she planned to publicly humiliate me and force a vote on the lien. She had no idea that the real battle was already being fought on a field she didn't even know existed by forces she could not hope to defeat. The weeks leading up to the annual meeting were quiet. It was the calm before the storm. Carol, emboldened by my silence, took it as a sign of submission. She sent out the meeting agenda, and right at the top of the new business was discussion and vote on lien for property at 12 Oak Circle for unpaid fines and destruction of HOA assets. My address. She was preparing for a public execution. My coalition of neighbors was nervous. They had put their faith in me, in my quiet confidence and my thick binders of evidence, but Carol's power had been absolute for so long that it was hard for them to imagine it ending. "What if it doesn't work, David?" Mr. Henderson asked me over the fence one evening. "What if she just shouts you down and the board votes with her? They always do." "The meeting isn't the battlefield, George," I told him. "It's just the stage. The battle has already been decided. We just have to watch the final act." I made one final preparation. I hired a certified court reporter and a videographer to officially record the meeting. It was my right as a homeowner, according to the bylaws, a detail I was sure Carol had overlooked. When they arrived and began setting up their equipment, I saw the first flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. Control was slipping. The community clubhouse was packed. Most residents usually skipped these tedious meetings, but word had spread. This was going to be a spectacle. Carol sat at the head of a long table with her 2 cronies on the board, a pair of passive men who owed their positions to her. She banged the gavel with theatrical force. "The meeting of the Oak Hollow Homeowners Association is now in session," she announced. She rushed through the old business, her eyes constantly flicking toward me. I sat in the front row, a simple leather portfolio on my lap. I remained perfectly still, my expression neutral. This unnerved her. She expected me to be angry, defensive. My calm was a foreign language to her. "Moving on to new business," she said, her voice dripping with venomous satisfaction. Item 1. The property at 12 Oak Circle. Mr. Caldwell has refused to pay a legitimate fine for the destruction of a $5,000 asset, a state-of-the-art surveillance drone. She was already lying. The drone cost $800 on Amazon, a fact I had documented. He has responded to official notices with frivolous pseudo-legal nonsense. Therefore, the board proposes a motion to place a lien on his property for the full amount plus legal fees, totaling $7,500. Do I have a second? One of her cronies immediately seconded the motion. "The motion is on the floor," Carol declared. "Discussion?" This was my cue. "Point of order, Madam President," I said, my voice calm and clear in the tense room. She glared at me. "What is it, Mr. Caldwell?" "According to Robert's Rules of Order, which our bylaws adopt, discussion must precede a vote. I would like to present evidence to the community before you call the question." She hesitated, cornered by her own supposed adherence to procedure. The court reporter's fingers were flying across her steno machine. The camera was pointed right at her. "Fine," she snapped. "You have 5 minutes." "I won't need that long," I said. I stood up and turned to face my neighbors. I opened my portfolio. I hadn't brought my master binders of evidence. That would have been too theatrical. I had only a single, double-sided sheet of paper for each resident. "My name is David Caldwell. For those of you who don't know me, I moved here 3 years ago after retiring from the U.S. Army. For 22 years, I worked in intelligence, dealing with complex data and financial crimes. When I received a fine for an event that happened entirely within my own property, I decided to use that skill set to look into our community's governance. I began to pass out the sheets of paper. People took them, their eyes wide. What you are holding is a summary of my findings, I continued, my voice even and methodical. On the front page, you will see a breakdown of the HOA's finances for the last 3 years. You'll note the line item for property management fees paid to a company called Prestige Property Management. What the board has failed to disclose is that this company is solely owned by our president, Carol Peters, a direct conflict of interest. A gasp went through the room. Carol's face went from crimson to a blotchy purple. This is slander. It's proprietary information. It's public record, Carol, I said, not even looking at her. You'll also note the payments to Evergreen Perfection for landscaping at a rate nearly 70% above market. This company is owned by Carol's brother-in-law, another fact conveniently omitted from disclosure. Over the past 3 years, over $250,000 of our dues have been paid directly to companies owned by our president or her immediate family. The room erupted in murmurs. I held up a hand for silence. Please turn the page over, I said. On the back is a list. It's a list of 17 of your neighbors, people who have been systematically harassed, fined, and intimidated by this board for violations as minor as the height of a flagpole or the placement of a child's toy. These are not actions designed to protect our property values. This is a pattern of abuse designed to assert control and punish dissent. Mr. Henderson stood up. She told me I had to rip out the roses my dead wife planted. Maria Garcia stood up. She's fining us every day because our children have a place to play. One by one, others began to stand, a silent, powerful testament to the truth of the document in their hands. Carol was hyperventilating now, her face a mask of disbelief and rage. This is an illegal meeting, a coup. I call for a vote. All in favor of the lien. But no one was listening to her. They were all looking toward the back of the room, where the main doors had just swung open. 2 men in dark, conservative suits stood in the doorway. They weren't cops. They had the unmistakable air of federal agents. Quiet, observant, radiating an authority that made Carol's manufactured power seem like a child's tantrum. One of the men walked calmly to the front of the room. He held up a badge. "Carol Peters?" he asked, his voice polite but firm. Carol looked like she had seen a ghost. Her jaw worked, but no sound came out. "I'm Special Agent Davies with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division," he said. "We have a warrant to seize all financial records of the Oak Hollow Homeowners Association, as well as those for Prestige Property Management and Evergreen Perfection." As he spoke, a second man, also in a suit, approached me. "Mr. Caldwell?" "Agent Miller, FAA. We'd like to talk to you about your report on UAS violations. We have a few follow-up questions." I simply nodded. "I'm at your disposal." The room was dead silent. The entire community watched as the architecture of Carol's petty tyranny was dismantled, brick, by forces she had never imagined she would provoke. Special Agent Davies turned back to a now trembling Carol. "Ms. Peters," he said, his voice devoid of any sympathy, "we are also conducting a joint investigation with the State Attorney General into allegations of fraud and racketeering. Your cooperation is advised." Her face, which I had documented in shades of red and purple, now went a stark, bloodless white. She finally understood. This was never about a drone. This was about everything. She had picked a fight with the quiet man at the end of the cul-de-sac, and in her arrogance, she had brought the full weight of the U.S. government down upon her own head. She had no idea. She never did. Her reign was over. The lien was forgotten. The meeting was adjourned, not by the gavel, but by the quiet click of a federal agent's ballpoint pen. Justice isn't always a thunderous explosion. Sometimes it's the rustle of paperwork, meticulously prepared and delivered to the right address. The aftermath was both swift and methodical. Carol's enablers on the board resigned in disgrace within 24 hours, scrambling to distance themselves from the implosion. A state judge appointed a temporary receiver to manage the HOA's affairs, a retired accountant who immediately froze all accounts and voided the contracts with Prestige Property Management and Evergreen Perfection. All pending fines and violations issued in the past year were summarily dismissed. A wave of relief washed over the neighborhood. The federal investigation unfolded with deliberate precision. The agents were courteous, but relentless. They interviewed me for several hours, and I walked them through my documentation, my spreadsheets, my timelines. They were impressed by the thoroughness. "You did 90% of our job for us, Mr. Caldwell," Agent Davies commented with a thin smile. I simply told them that I believe in completed staff work. I also turned over the drone, still sealed in its Faraday bag. The FAA technician who examined it confirmed it was not registered for commercial use and that its flight log data, which they were able to recover, placed it directly over my property at the time of the incident, corroborating my report perfectly. The Garcias were told they could keep their swing set. Mr. Henderson's roses were safe. The veteran was allowed to fly his flag at any height he pleased. The small, oppressive rules that Carol had wielded like a club were simply erased. The neighborhood started to breathe again. People started talking to each other more, hosting barbecues, letting their kids play across lawns without fear of a white and green violation notice appearing on their door. The fear that had held the community in its grip dissipated like morning fog. A few months later, the results of the investigations became public. Carol and her brother-in-law were indicted on multiple counts of wire fraud, mail fraud, and tax evasion. Faced with the mountain of evidence I had provided, they had no choice but to take a plea deal. Carol was sentenced to 18 months in a low-security federal prison and was ordered to pay over $300,000 in restitution to the HOA. Every cent she had bilked from us. Her cousin, the lawyer, was disbarred for his role in the scheme. The day her sentence was announced, I saw a "for sale" sign go up in her yard. It was a foreclosure. Her assets had been seized to help pay the restitution. Her little empire had not only crumbled, but it had consumed her entirely. There was no triumphalism in watching her fall, only a quiet, profound sense of order being restored. She had sown the wind, and she had reaped the whirlwind. With the legal battles concluded, a new HOA board was elected. Mr. Henderson, to his own surprise, was unanimously voted in as the new president. His first official act was to propose a bylaw that strictly prohibited any board member from having a financial interest in any company doing business with the HOA. It passed without a single dissenting vote. Life returned to a peaceful rhythm. My neighbors would wave as I walked my dog. They would occasionally drop off a pie or a plate of cookies as a silent thank you. They didn't need to say anything. We all understood what had happened. We had faced down a bully not with anger, but with solidarity and facts. We had demonstrated that the pen is, in fact, mightier than the sword, or in this case, the illegally operated drone. I finished my radio telescope. On clear nights, I sit in my workshop, the low hum of the servers a comforting sound. The array points to the sky, passively listening to the faint, ancient signals from distant galaxies. It's a search for order in the cosmic chaos, a reminder that there are vast, silent systems at work that are far more powerful than any petty human ambition. I had never wanted a fight. I just wanted to be left alone in my fortress of solitude. But when my peace was threatened, I responded with the skills I had. I conducted reconnaissance, I built a coalition, I prepared the battlefield, and I executed a precise, overwhelming strike. Carol thought she was dealing with a retired furniture maker. She learned far too late that she had trespassed on the territory of a man who understood that the most effective weapon in the modern world is a well-documented, perfectly organized, and ruthlessly deployed piece of paper. Justice had been served, not in a fiery confrontation, but in the quiet, methodical dismantling of a corrupt regime. And the neighborhood finally was at peace.